Hello and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm John Filipek, Senior Manager of Federal Sales for SHI International Corporation. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Mark Brady, Chief Data Officer for the United States Space Force. Hi, Mark. How are you today?
I'm doing good, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Mark, before we get started, I just wanted to first say thank you for your service. Greatly appreciated
hmm
here. And then also, if you wouldn't mind, just explaining a little bit more about your current role at the Space Force, and then we can get into a little bit more of the topics that we have on deck for you today.
Yeah, well, I'm the Space Force CDO and their first CDO. I got into space data back when I joined Air Force Space Command. That was in 2018. And then when they stood up the Space Force in 2020, I was asked to be their first CDO. So I'm essentially responsible for policy and data throughout the Space Force.
Awesome. That's very, very exciting and definitely interesting, for me. So I'm glad I have the pleasure of being able to speak with you today. So getting right into it then, from a change management standpoint, specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about organizational change management and the data
hmm
literacy behind it.
hmm
So my first question for you is, what do you believe is taking so long for other organizations to adapt change management, and then more specifically, engaging data literacy to do so?
All right. So for many organizations, the main obstacle is that they aren't sure of what to do. They know that data is super important and they know they need to drive their mission success with it. They just don't know how. And the same is true for data literacy. You can't train someone in something if you don't know what that thing is. That's why at the Space Force, we've developed something called Next Generation Data Management. And Next Gen, as we call it, is the underlying theory and also the how.
Fantastic. And then it sounds, although you may not be having issues garnering support, but one of the things that I, read while trying to prepare for this particular interview is that that's one of the biggest hurdles that most CDOs are trying to overcome is changing the mindset within an organization for this to be like a good to have versus something that's necessary. So if you don't mind speaking a little bit to how you were able to garner the support, I'm sure your stellar resume leading into this particular role helped with
hmm
that. But how were you able to kind of change and guide some of the other leadership within your organization in order to get some of that backing for you?
Yeah, so our data program really was kicked off by Major General Kreider, who was the first CDO for the Department of the Air Force prior to the existence of the Space Force. And she was the one that hired me in. So we had strong support for data management in the Space Force right from the beginning. We have some leading edge approaches such as having a centralized data repository, which we call the Unified Data Library, which is something that may be somewhat threatening to a lot of organizations to centralize everything in one place because there's a fear perhaps of loss of control. So I think the Space Force, right from the beginning, was very leading edge in this regard. Now, as far as the data literacy is concerned, that wasn't too much of a problem. What we did was we put together a short course, realizing that people have a day job where they have a lot of obligations and so forth and can't break away for long periods. And we offered that last January. That was an introductory course in Next Generation, and then we hope to hold another one this coming January, which will be more in depth. So we had very good interest in that. We had very good participation, and that was even in the middle of the whole COVID thing with the travel restrictions and everything. So we expect to build on that and not have any difficulties really.
And so, would you say that's more of the 101 course that they've gone through, and now the next step here is going to be a 201, or is it going to be to gain additional individuals into that 101?
Yeah, it'll be more of the 201 because our first course was a day and a half, and a day and a half, you can't really dig in too deep into database design and metadata repositories and how to use metadata and system design and all those things. So we're going to get into it pretty deep and also provide them with a lot of materials that they can take home.
Well, that's fantastic. What business challenges are you most excited to solve by implementing the data literacy strategies that you have already?
Well, there's a couple. So I think data literacy is going to help us to achieve more accurate and powerful analyses. So you can have two organizations, they have exactly the same data, but the way that they design their databases, the way they use their data could lead them to two completely different levels in terms of capabilities. And then secondly, data literacy can help us to develop more transparent data systems. A data system isn't much good if it's a black box. So we want to get that transparency, and we want to have our people working inside the data systems rather than being on the outside and looking in.
That's very, very interesting. So it's a more of, instead of kind of reporting the news, making sure that the day to day is actually um, happening within the box, as you
Hmm.
mentioned.
Yep, that's right.
Awesome. So, I mean, that kind of answers my next question in terms of once up and running, how do you plan on sustaining it? But more importantly, how do you feel you're going to be able to measure the success?
Well, a lot of measures are binary. You have something or you don't. But in terms of the binary, I would say I think we're sustainable when everyone is participating in data use and data stewardship across the enterprise. You don't want to necessarily have this in compartments. Everyone can participate, and they're going to do so in different ways depending on what their role is and what their level of expertise is, but we'd like to see that broader participation in the use and management of the data. I think once we get to that point, then we'll be sustainable.
Great. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. Obviously, so switching gears here a little bit now over to digital transformation, more specifically, right, accelerating the innovation around that. Out of the four main areas that were listed from a digital transformation: process transformation, business model transformation, domain transformation, and cultural transformation. Which do you personally gravitate towards more?
Well, most CDOs will tell you that cultural change is the biggest challenge. There may still be some challenges technically if an organization is still trying to use first generation techniques, but that cultural change is usually the big one. So I don't know if I gravitate towards it, but I recognize it as being the thing that we really need to solve in order to make progress. Even though the Space Force is, uh, I would say, one of the leading organizations in terms of um, being forward leaning in this area. Um, and in that regard, knowledge is power, as they say. And so withholding knowledge can be seen in certain organizations as being job security. And we really need to turn that around so that people see their job security depending on the sharing of data. The more you share data, the more secure that your job will be. Um, and so, a corollary of that is that we think of data security as being a major risk. But one thing that is largely under recognized is that underutilization of data is just as large of a risk. So we need to make sure that we use our data. In order to do that, we need to share it.
And how, from your particular position, have you been able to kind of stir that up within the organization, right? You mentioned holding your cards kind of close to the vest
Hmm.
is more of how people have gone about it in the past.
Yep.
How do you kind of foster that within your environment?
Well, obviously, in our environment, there are certain people that can see certain data, and we do need to have that data security. But at the same time, we need to make sure that people get the data that they need to accomplish their mission. And actually, one of our major pushes right now is to take a fresh look and develop new policy on data access.
Based on the level of clearance and what individuals should be looking
Hmm.
at what. That makes okay.
Yep.
And that
Hmm.
adds a whole nother challenge to the overall buy-in from the
Hmm.
organization, I'm sure. So that
Yeah.
kind of spoke a little bit to the challenges that you're facing
Hmm.
when trying to implement that. So you spoke very briefly around being able to educate and enable a majority of the force there
Hmm.
during COVID-19. So what effects? It sounds like maybe some positive, right? Came out
Yeah.
of COVID-19. What would you say overall, though, was the most difficult part about trying to implement that during this time?
In terms of real impacts, teleworking is the thing. And it's been great. So the ability to telework brings great efficiency. People spend more time being productive, less time commuting, and it also leverages talent that's spread across large geographic areas, even the whole world. So I would say the telework capability and virtual presence is the thing that COVID has really helped us with.
Makes a ton of sense. So I appreciate you even
Hmm.
putting it in terms that I can understand, which is sometimes not that easy. So thank you, Dr. Mark Brady, for joining me today. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for any additional interviews, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
All right, John, it's been my pleasure.